All right, what's up, you guys? We're live. So before I fully jump in, I'll jump in a few minutes. In the chat, you can just let me know where you're coming from. Tell me the city or state so I know that you can hear me and we can hear where you're from. Where are you coming from? What city and state are you tuning in from? Type it in the chat. Houston, Indy, sweet. I've actually never been to either of those cities. Tucson, Arizona, Duluth. Woo! Los Angeles. Cool. This is awesome. Look at all you guys around here. Actually, shout out to two of my former students who are in here, Teenan and Carla. It's awesome. LA, Virginia. Where else are you guys from? Where are you from? Post where you're from if you haven't yet, so I know where you're coming from, which is going to be cool. New Jersey. Not sure what that is. All right, where else are we coming from? I'm live right now. I'm in South Portland, Maine. It literally snowed today. I looked outside and it was snowing. So that's what I'm dealing with, which is, super fun. So bad with history. No worries. We're going to get better at it. Okay. So I'm going to show you all the help that I can possibly give you. So I'm going to start this right here. So you should be able to see me and the slides. And then you have the chat as well. So you can type in questions at any point. If you haven't already, tell me where you're coming from. That's awesome for me to know. And I will, give you some shout outs throughout. If you ask an awesome question, I can definitely, is there a public chat or is it just a private chat? It should be public. Can you see each other's comments? Cool. Yeah, you just answered that question. So you should be able to see each other's comments, which is awesome. And then please type in questions. I'm going to be asking you questions sometimes to help you review. So if you have answers to my questions, if you have your own questions, definitely type them in the chat so that we can keep the conversation going. And if you're just joining us, so a couple people have just come in, let me know where you're coming from. You can type in your city and or state so that we get a good sense of where you're from. That's a good question, John. This session is going to be, honestly, period one is pretty quick. It's only about 5% of the exam, so this one should probably go until maybe 7:30, and then I'll take some questions at the end. So this one in particular will be a little bit shorter than the other ones because there's just less for you to know. But I'm gonna really highlight the most important things, and so you definitely want to make sure you stick around till the end. So all right, so we've got a couple people in here. I'm gonna jump in. Is there gonna be more stuff like this? Yes, and that's what I'm gonna tell you all about in a second. When will you do all the other periods? Those are really good questions. All right, so this is the high-level history community. So I want to welcome you. This is the very first high-level history group review session for AP World. So we're starting with period one because it's April. We gotta jump back. So. My name is Amanda Doamaral. If you have not yet met me, I'm at High Lev History on Twitter, on Instagram, on Tumblr. There's also a Facebook group for AP World students. If you just type in AP World History students, it'll come up on Facebook. So my main goal is to help you earn college credit for AP History classes. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. And I taught AP World History for the last 5 years. And this year, I'm really focusing on bringing a lot of my supports online. So just so you know, you got 41 days as of right now until the AP World exam. So if that makes you kind of go a little crazy, type in a 1 in the chat box if you are like, oh, shoot, 41 days until the AP World exam. Ones. All right, I can sense the panic setting in. I know. There it is. Ones. 2. Maybe you're okay with it. Maybe you're like, okay, maybe you're ready to go. Maybe you've been studying all year. Maybe you're wondering, anyone know how to actually study? Right? We've got 10,000 years of history to cover. You've got a lot of different essays to write. AP World, the history exams in general are some of the hardest ones, just because there's just so much. Obviously, AP Chem is super hard too. AP Calc, all of these are hard. But the question is, does anybody know how to actually study? So you asked about upcoming group reviews. Tomorrow at 4 p.m., I'm actually going to be live again. And this time we're going to be talking about period one multiple choice. So I'm going to actually bring up Albert IO. I got my own subscription to that. I'm going to be doing some of the live questions on that for period one. So everything I covered today, I'm going to be practicing multiple choice questions tomorrow. Tomorrow you got to take a mock exam for AP World. You'll be fine. This will help you with period 1. And then honestly, with a mock exam, you can really tell where you're at. So upcoming group reviews. Period 1 multiple choice is tomorrow. Next weekend, I'm going to be focused on period 2. So I'll do a complete review on April 13th for period 2. I know I've gotten a lot of questions about the classical empires. What do I need to know about Rome, India, China? So period 2 is next Friday. And then period 2 short answers, looking at on Saturday, April 14th. So every Friday and Saturday until the exam. And then during the exam week, I'm actually going to be covering stuff every single night. So every night before the exam, we're going to jump on the same platform that you're in right now. This is called Demio. It kind of lets me talk and then have a chat. And so just keep in mind, all of the replays for these groups, I'm going to be posting within 24 hours to the Teachable community. So for those of you that are already registered for the high level history community, that's where you'll be able to see the group reviews, replays, and you can watch those as many times as you want. Same time, John? Yes. So on Fridays, I'll do 7 p.m. Eastern, and on Saturdays, I'll do 4 p.m. Eastern, so that you can hop in at those times. And then again, the replays are always available. So if you can't join live, you can come in and see it at the replay. Jason, good question. I am an AP World History teacher. I taught AP World for 5 years in Oakland, and then I also read for the exam. So I know, I've been trained by College Board. I know exactly what they're looking for, what happens at those massive grading sessions. So the replay is in the Teachable community, and so I'm going to be sharing a link with you after for how to get the replays. So this is also a quick announcement for all community members. So if you are a current community member for high level history, the ambassador program is now open, and there are actually a few of you. Dylan, I think you're signed up for here, where you're already an ambassador and you're already part of this program, but it's kind of like an extra leadership and resume building program for you. And then also you have 15% of all referrals. So quick question. How many of you are actually signed up to take AP US History next year? Type in a 1 or me. Yeah. So look, a lot of you are taking AP US. That's awesome. Taking it in 2 years. That's awesome that you're not, keep going with the AP. You're going to be taking AP US History. So high level history, the community, I'm actually going to be doing APUSH summer reviews, previews. So that you can go into your class, like already having a sense of what you have to know. And then also all of next year, I'm going to be doing US history, reviews throughout the year. So 1 a week in the fall and then 2 a week in the spring. So this is going to be an awesome resource for you. So if you're not yet a member of the high level history community, if you came into this review with you saw my tweet, or you saw Freemanpedia's tweet, or you came to the live session earlier this week for the pep talk. So if you came to any of those things and you're in here and you're not yet a member, at the end of this review, I'm going to give you a pretty sweet membership deal at the end of the review session tonight, so that you can become a member. It's like not that much more expensive than a prep book, and I'm going to be giving you live reviews every week forever, and you can get AP World this year and AP US next year. So keep that in mind. Definitely stay tuned until the end, and I'm going to give you a cool review code for that. Okay, so let's jump in to period 1. So something that you should know going into this. Period 1, 5% of the exam, right? It's not going to be a huge chunk, but you are for sure going to see at least one, if not, a 1 multiple choice question set on it. And those are 3 questions that are going to be pretty easy for you to get, because there's not a lot of material for period 1. So with this review session, I'm going to give you everything you have to know so that you can get those questions right. And that's going to really boost your chance of getting a 4 or a 5. So if you don't already have a pen and paper out, I highly recommend that you take notes on this. I'm not going to be posting, a ton of text on the PowerPoint or anything. So it should be pretty easy for you to just kind of take notes on what's the most important things to know. And then I'll also give you some other resources throughout so that you can continue studying those. So jumping in, I'm going to kind of organize this by key concept key concept. So this is key concept 1.1. It's the shortest one out of any of them. It's all about early humans and migration. Have any of you guys taken big history? Maybe in ninth grade, you took a class called Big History. If you have, then you already know this stuff. This stuff comes from big history. If not, no worries. This is going to be quick. So 1.1, the first thing to know is the out of Africa theory. So this is really looking at early humans, that the stage, before we even really get to like Homo sapiens, we've got this out of Africa theory, and this is what it looks like. So basically the idea is that all humans originated from like sub-Saharan Africa, where that red section is of Africa. And then from there, they migrate out to the rest of the world. So, you've got humans heading into Europe, heading into the Middle East, into East Asia, and, Oceania, and then finally over to the Americas. A lot of times College Board will put a map like this in the multiple choice question, and then you have to answer a set based on this. And so this is kind of an easy point to remember. Humans, the early out of Africa theory is that humans are coming out of Africa, right? So they're coming from Africa, they're going to the rest of the world. So again, if you have any questions about anything I'm talking about, drop it in the chat. I'll be highlighting some key terms as well throughout, and then just, drop any questions you have in the chat. Okay, so there's actually 3 points for key concept 1.1. The second one is about forager communities. So before humans produced agriculture, they were foragers, they were hunter-gatherers. These forager communities were egalitarian. So that means that they were equal. It wasn't like a power structure. They were equal to each other. And it was all about like survival. Do I have the things I need to survive? And in my community, we're going to all make sure that we all survive. So it's not about me having more money than someone else. It's like, what can I do to make sure that my community survives? And so you get groups of people that live in these small kinship groups. You don't have huge communities because it's hard to sustain too big of communities. And then also there's no private wealth. Dylan, good question. No leaders. And so usually what you get in a small group is you do still get someone that kind of takes a leadership role, but you're not going to see like a king or, someone who has like an official power role. Like generally there would be like a male figure that kind of had the leadership role in the family, but it's not necessarily that they are the actual leader. Instead, it's really working together, this is a really weird picture I found on Google, live footage action of forager egalitarians. So what you really see is just like small groups of people working together. Somewhat the beginning of patriarchy. Yeah, Tatiana. So we definitely have, early ideas of patriarchy in this. It's, it's not like it was egalitarian and women were not necessarily seen as less, but because of our like difference in biology, men would tend to go like hunt and women would tend to gather. But that's just because of our like differences in strength. So that kind of is how it sort of played out. And in some ways this was like patriarchal, but it wasn't always like intended to be, not like we see today. So here's an awesome documentary that you can, I'm just going to try to share this resource with you, share with attendees. Okay, so you should be seeing as, can you see a link for YouTube? It should have come up for you. This is an awesome documentary. It's called Birth of Civilization. Worth clicking the link and saving it for later. It's kind of long, but it's like an hour, but it's all like a mockumentary. It's like a dramatic reenactment of some of these things. And I showed this every single year for 5 years in my big history class. And it's like the best way to fully understand what the Forager Society looked like. So a couple questions. Are these people what we see today as cavemen? Yeah, it's kind of like, well, we call them cavemen because we think of people like early humans as being like less than us, but that's not necessarily true, right? So that's kind of a way that it's kind of something that we call them, but yes and no, right? What is patriarchy? Is that when men is favored over women or that men have more power? Yeah, so John, to answer your question, patriarchy is a really important term to know for all of AP World. It's really when we see like a society that's dominated by men, and that can be coming from different power structures, where a man is going to be favored over a woman for different roles in society. And so that's something that we deal with today, and it's something that starts all the way back then. Did spoken word arise? Yeah, so the hunter-gatherer groups did speak to each other and did a lot of like, what is it called? Oral history. Like they, like their histories continued on through telling each other stories. But we're not going to see written word until the next section. So, all right, so I'm going to stop sharing this. So if you didn't get the YouTube link for the birth of civilization, you can just, if you just YouTube birth of civilization, it's just like it's honestly, if you're going to watch something this weekend, worth watching. Hannah, totally not off topic. That's on topic. I'm going to actually get into bureaucracy in a little bit when we actually see it forming. So in this section of Key Concept 1.1, we're really looking at those early humans. And so the last piece here is human use of fire. I think there was like a Disney movie not that long ago about how humans used fire, like that early, I forget what it was called. But basically, when humans start using fire, that's a huge, like, awesome thing that happened for humans, because we get to see an increase in our brain size. Part of that is because our food becomes more nutritious when it's cooked. And then second, it's going to lead to like the socialization and more complex languages. We've got humans sitting around a fire and talking to each other, and that's going to improve our language systems. And so like that question, Dylan, about spoken word, like our languages are going to very much improve because of our use of fire, right? So you've got people sitting around a fire, and it really is all about, like that socialization is huge. You don't necessarily have that before fire. And so one of the really early like turning points for humans is fire. That's a huge change for humans. So this is all Key Concept 1.1. This is everything you need to know for this key concept. It's like I said, it's short, excuse me. So I've highlighted for you below a quick exam tip. Where are you going to see this information? There might be a question about early human migrations, like I had showed you, that out of Africa theory, in the multiple choice. That's an awesome multiple choice question. You also might see a question in the short answers that kind of extends to this time period, but it won't be all about this time. And then again, you might also see a long essay question. One of your options might extend as far back as 8,000 BC, and maybe it's talking about advances in technology. So fire is an example you could use from this really early time period. Okay, so that's Key Concept 1.1. If you have any questions, drop them in. I will answer as I go, but I'm going to jump towards Key Concept 1.2. So by the time about 10,000 years ago rolls around, this is when we're really going to start to see the Neolithic revolution. And this is like one of the most important turning points in all of human history, is Neolithic revolution. This is when we get agriculture. So before this, we're hunter-gatherers. We're not agrarians. We're not farmers. But at this point, this is when we start to be farmers. And this is going to change a lot. I've listed here some of the ways in which the Neolithic revolution changed human society. We've got pastoralism, right? Instead of just hunting and gathering, we're actually going to be farming, and maybe not necessarily all in the same place all the time. Like we might farm one area until it's kind of all the resources have been depleted, and then we move and farm in a different area. But we're still farming, and that's a big difference than trying to go and gather and hunt your food. The domestication of plants and animals, this is part of it as well. We have like dogs, for example, being domesticated and using dogs as, a way to like protect your family. Like that wasn't seen before. Irrigation as a way to like change water sources so that you don't have to live by by a water source. You don't have to live by a river anymore. You can live outside of that and still get the water sources from the river. The population is going to go way up. So this is like a universal truth in history. If you remember anything, these universal truths are good. When there's more food, there's always more people, right? More food equals more people. So at this time, we're going to see a population increase because there's more food. We're also going to start to see specialization of labor. So it used to be that everyone had to really like all focus on finding food, right? It's all about, getting food in order to survive. But once you have farming, not everybody has to be focused on that anymore. So instead, hold on, Elliot. So instead, I will, you can focus on different things. Some people could focus on making pottery. Some people could focus on making, all kinds of different things. So you've got this specialization of labor. Not everybody has to be a hunter-gatherer anymore. Instead, you can gain a specialty and you can get good at that. We're going to see a lot of improvements in trade and transportation, and then also just social stratification. Like I said before, it's all equal. Everyone has the same goal. But as soon as you start to see a specialization of labor, that's when you have like some people more powerful than others. So hitting on the questions that I just got. Yes, Elliot, I would recommend taking down the points. This is going to help you just, take notes, and you don't necessarily have to write down every single thing, but especially the things that are going to matter to you. And I'm trying to not put too many texts up here so that it's easy to follow. And Jason, do we see any religion in this period? Yes, but we're really going to see them in 1.3. So I will get to that in a few slides. And John, what is irrigation? So irrigation is when you're changing a water source so that you can, instead of just waiting for it to rain, you can pull water from, rivers or water sources that you have and kind of like change the path of it so that it will reach your farm, or change it so that water sources from rain are going to, help your farming. So these are all examples of how humans are affecting their environment. So it's not just waiting for the environment to work for me. It's changing the way the environment works so that it benefits me. And these are all examples of that. So one like really interesting point, and hopefully this text is not too light, is whether or not the Neolithic Revolution was actually good for human society. This is something that they might ask you to argue on the exam. Maybe at the beginning of the year you read Jared Diamond's Worst Mistake in Humanity. And that is like one argument that this was actually not a good thing for humans. But there's a lot of arguments that it was. So just to take you through this a little bit, was the Neolithic Revolution good for society? Well, in the blue, we have an increased population. We have cities, we have civilizations. So those are good things. But when you have those things, people live closer together, and that's going to lead to disease, right? When you have foragers, they're moving around, disease is not as likely. But when you have people living in close quarters, it's much more likely, especially if you're living close to the animals that you're domesticated. Second, domestication of plants and animals. So we have better nutrition. That's awesome. But we're really affecting our environment. We have deforestation, desertification, right? Like changing the soil. Slash and burn agriculture is where you are essentially like using as much as you can, and then you kind of burn it and move to the next thing. So, good for humans, we have better nutrition, bad for the environment. We're affecting our environment. The third one, development of new technologies. Awesome, right? New technology makes our lives easier. But with that, you also are going to get increased conflict and warfare, right? If someone else has a technology that I want, I'm going to fight them for it. So more conflict. Plus, we're just getting better weapons. So conflict and warfare in general is going to get more and more, bloody as we go. And then finally, a specialization of labor. That's in general awesome, because when you have a specialization of labor, you get more products, you get more of a market. But we see, goodbye egalitarian societies and hello social stratification. So, you think of today, you think of humans inside of like a pyramid, right? There's always people who benefit and there's always people who don't. And that can be applied to gender, to class, to race, to any group within society. And, you have power structures. So in egalitarian societies, you don't. Everyone's equal. But now that we have social stratification, you do. So is specialization of labor good? Yeah, we have more products. But we also see more of power structures exist. So we're going to answer these questions. Does period 1 end around the river civilizations, or does it go past it? So I'm going to hit on the major civilizations coming up next. Could you make a synthesis statement with the Industrial Revolution and the Neolithic Revolution? Yes, Tatiana, I love that. I will actually talk a little bit about that. But you're exactly right. There are benefits when we get better, right? You can make a chart like this for the Industrial Revolution. You know, what are 4 ways that the Industrial Revolution made our life better? And what's 4 ways that it made our life worse? And then you can definitely see relations between them, right? More technology is awesome, but it leads to more conflict. You know, more specialization of labor is awesome, but it leads to more social stratification, right? You have the upper class, the lower class, or the middle class. So that's exactly the way you want to think about this. And this slide in particular, you know, you're not going to get a question that just straight up asks you, was it good? But you could definitely get a short answer question that says, what's one benefit of the Neolithic Revolution? What's another benefit of the Neolithic Revolution? What's one way in which it made our life not as good? You know, awesome. When will we talk about the rivers? That's coming up next. So keep in mind, the key concepts for AP World are not exactly your textbook, right? So key concept 1.1, early humans, 1.2, Neolithic Revolution, 1.3 is the early civilizations. I probably should have given you a slide at the beginning to lay that out. Okay, so second thing you need to know, and this is where we start to see civilizations, is now that we have the Neolithic Revolution, we're going to see permanent settlements form across the world. It happens at all different times. They don't all form at the same time. It happens everywhere in the world, on every continent. I'm not sure about Antarctica, but probably. And then it's also going to happen always near rivers and water sources. Okay, let me pause really quick. Egalitarian society seems kind of weird today. There would be no need for wealth. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it is kind of a, you can kind of tie egalitarianism to almost like a communist socialist society, because it does make everything equal, and it definitely goes against capitalism where you can work harder to earn more. But you can't necessarily apply it to the world that we live in, because we do not live in an egalitarian society, and so it would be hard to like adjust to that. You know, like think about it. You have your phone, right? Like you have a phone and it's your phone. You own that phone, or your parents own that phone. And if someone takes your phone, well, you're going to be pissed, right? Like that's your phone. But that idea of like private ownership doesn't exist in this early time period. It would be like our phone, right? We have this together. I mean, they wouldn't have a phone, but same thing. So it's hard to apply it because we just don't live in a world without that. Hannah, I'm going to get to bureaucracy when I get to civilizations, okay? So stick around for that. All right, so Catalhayek is the first major city, and this actually comes up in that Birth of Civilization documentary that I sent you. They talk about Catalhayek. It's kind of in the Middle East and where Turkey is today. And this is kind of a cool picture. You can kind of see, like, obviously people were living in much closer quarters than ever before. At the top of the roof, that's where their doors were. So they literally would build nice and close to each other and then put the door at the top so that they could kind of jump around. Awesome. I'm glad that this is helping you. You're going to totally nail it on the period 1 questions. So Catalhayek is like your first example. You see a lot of in that section in Catalhayek, you're going to see a lot more like disease spread because it's so close. I don't know if in this picture you can see animals in there, but you would have seen animals in that section. So, and that is going to spread disease further. So anyway, so that's Catalhayek. And then another quick image for you to kind of help you see this, all the purple, all of that is where these early civilizations formed. And every single purple also coincides with water, with rivers mostly. So you can see exactly like where they're going to form is going to be around rivers. That's why they're called these like early river civilizations. So like something like this is also and yes, these are the core and foundational civilizations. You know, you've got China, you've got the Indus River Valley. In Southeast Asia, there's more. In Egypt, right? That purple is going right on the Nile. You got Mesopotamia, and then in the Americas, right? You have the Andean societies and the Mesoamerican societies. You know, so you've got all of these foundational civilizations all around water. This would also make for a really good multiple choice question or a short answer question where you have to kind of analyzed why they're all developing where they are. Like, that's not a coincidence. It's even though they're at different time periods, they're all about the use of water. And good question, Dylan. So are they using coasts? Yes. They're not just using rivers, they're also using coastal waters. However, it's salty, so you're not using it necessarily for exactly the same purposes, but you've got seafood that you can eat, you know, you can hunt in there. So we're really going to start to see that. But there are rivers in all those places. There are lakes in Africa. Why didn't civilizations start in that area? That's a good question. I don't know. I mean, you kind of stumped me. I'm not sure why we don't see early civilizations in that like sub-Saharan Africa region. I think, you know, a lot of the early humans migrated out of that region. It probably had to do with climate at the time. Maybe it looked a little bit different, and so they had to kind of adjust for that, and that's definitely like a huge reason why. But I'm not entirely sure. So good question. Okay, key concept 1.2. So we're 2/3 of the way done with period 1. So in key concept 1.2, what do you actually have to know? Well, in the yellow, here's an exam tip. Multiple choice question on Paleolithic versus Neolithic could be something that you definitely see. A short answer question on the agricultural revolution could definitely be something that you see. And then, like someone had mentioned before, I think it was Tatiana had mentioned before, the synthesis opportunity. They might not ask you about these things in general, but if you have a DBQ or an LEQ about industrialization, you can write a paragraph about this stuff, get that complexity point, and you know, you're on your way to earning a higher score. So even if they don't ask you specifically about these things, you can use this as synthesis in your essays, right? If you have something that you can relate it to, if you have an essay about the development of technology, for example, awesome, write a paragraph and compare that to the Neolithic revolution, and that's going to get you that complexity point, you know, that last complexity point that's like elusive, you're not sure how to get it. That's how you get it. The synthesis is not outside info. Synthesis is so, you know, on the rubrics for LEQ and DBQ, there's that last point that's called like complexity in history or something like that. That's the one where they list like 4 different ways that you can earn that point. Synthesis is one way. So synthesis is comparing something in a different time period or a different place. So if you're talking about, you know, period 5, period 6, period 4, then you could compare something that happens then to period 1, and that would give you that complexity point. Would really good contextualization count as synthesis? So no, you can't double dip. So you can write an awesome contextualization and get the context point, but you would need something else for your synthesis. Nothing that you do in any of your essays are going to count as more than 1 point. And then Paleolithic was like hunting and gathering. Yes, so Paleolithic literally means old Stone Age. Neolithic means new Stone Age. So those are just the time periods. So it's Paleo and then Neo. Other ways in synthesis to get the complexity point. Yes, there are 3 other ways. They have to do with counter arguments, and if it asks you to compare that you're actually doing similarities and differences, for example. So you don't have to do synthesis, but I personally, I'm a champion of synthesis because I see it as always possible. If you're learning history in terms of patterns as a story, 1, it's easier to understand the history, and 2, you can actually use that to your advantage. You can use synthesis to get a point. So I'm kind of like always a proponent of synthesis. Hannah, so I'll get into similarities and differences during a different session when we talk about comparison, but I will show you all kinds of examples. We're going to do sample essays together. And so that's something that you'll see how that sounds. So, all right, so let's get into 1.3. So these are the early civilizations. So there are some characteristics that all of them have. So if you think about this in terms of a comparison essay, you know, one of the options you're going to get in the LEQ is going to be on periods 1 or 2. So you'll have 3 choices of LEQs. The first one will be periods 1 and 2. The second one will be periods 3 and 4. And the third one will be periods 5 and 6. So that first option could be asking you to compare early civilizations. All of these things are true for every single civilization. What they might look like in each might be a little bit different, but all of them have, powerful states, cities, bureaucracies. So in terms of bureaucracy, the question that I think it was Hannah that asked that earlier, bureaucracy, you can really think of it as like a dresser, like where you put your clothes. So you've got your dresser, and sometimes it's called a bureau. You've got all these different drawers, and you keep different things in different drawers. That's kind of how a bureaucracy works. So instead of having one drawer for every single government office, we have like a bunch of different ones. You've got, like, think of our government. You have veteran affairs, you have education, you have, environment, you have national security, all kinds of different organizations. And so that's how these early civilizations worked. They had all these different sections to them. Then they would each focus on different aspects of the civilization. And Tatiana Olmec is period 1, and I have a slide on that coming up. So all the civilizations also had agricultural surplus. So like we talked about before, when you're farming a lot of food, you don't have to always worry about survival. You can now do other things. And all of these civilizations had a surplus. So they were creating more food than they needed to actually survive, so they could, stash that food for later and worry about something else. Like, once you're like, think about yourself. If you come home and you're starving, like you're super hungry from your whole day at school, whatever, you're not about to jump into homework right away. You need to eat first, right? Like, that's so important. And so that's true here. People don't worry about art and cool things until they're fed. Like, that's step number 1. And so that's happening in all these civilizations. Third, all of them are building monumental architecture. You've got the pyramids, the ziggurats, the different walls for protection. All of them are building. And part of it is for, like I said, protection. And the other part is, like, if you build big, people respect you. And they love that, right? So that's part of the reason why. But again, you don't build unless you have enough money to do that and you're not hungry. Fourth, all of them have writing systems. There's different types. There's like cuneiform, hieroglyphics, quipu in Mesoamerica. All of them are going to lead to different types of legal codes. The fourth, a lot of these rulers are going to use divine right. That means that they kind of attach their rule to like a god or a belief system, right? It's easier to say I should be in power because I was chosen by, and then, whatever god your whole group, your society believes in, or several gods, you attach your rule to that belief system, and then people are more likely to see it. Exactly, mandate of heaven. And so I'm going to go through each society and show you some specifics of each of these for each society. But exactly, like divine right, if you're ruling a society that's very religious or very attached to a belief system, it's pretty easy to convince them that you should be in charge if you tell them that it's their like God, their ruler, their divine right to be, that how they were chosen to be there. Fourth, there's always competition for resources. Some people have more resources than others. Depends on where your civilization is located. Maybe you have access to iron, and other people are going to want that. So competition. And then finally, new weapons. So this is kind of like an overview of 1.3. All of the civilizations that we see have these things, and those are really important, factors. So getting into a little bit about each one, I'm not going to tell you like every single detail about every early civilization because you don't need to know that. But I'm just going to kind of like highlight the most important things. There are 3 Mesopotamian civilizations: Sumer, Babylon, and then the Persian Empire. In terms of each one, here's just a couple of quick things. Sumer is the first one. They're the ones that develop cuneiform. That's the form of writing in Mesopotamia. They're polytheistic, so they believe in many gods. And then they also built ziggurats, which kind of look like pyramids. I think it's my next slide. Yeah, here they go. This is what a ziggurat looks like. It's kind of flat on the top. It's a temple, right? But it's huge. So this is their version of monumental architecture. Babylon is the second one. They kind of come after Sumer. The biggest thing with them is the Code of Hammurabi. So King Hammurabi was a Babylonian king, and he wrote this like first legal code. They love to ask questions with like the source being the Code of Hammurabi. Have you read the Code of Hammurabi? Did you do that in class? Hit a 1 if you did. If you have seen some of those codes, a lot of teachers start the year with that, with like, here's what the Code of Hammurabi looked like. Yeah, exactly, right? It's pretty intense. It's like a no-joke law system. So they love to ask you questions about that, where like they'll have a sample of, a piece of an excerpt from the Code of Hammurabi, and they'll ask you a set of questions about that. So just know that that's coming from Babylon, and Babylon is in Mesopotamia. Exactly, right? So a lot of you have seen that. And then Babylon invaded the Hittites, for example, and they had bronze. So Babylon gets bronze because of that. And then finally, the Persian Empire, it just comes after Babylon. So basic things to know about Mesopotamia are the words that I have bolded for you. Those are your like key terms to know. All right, so there's that ziggurat. Egypt. So this one has a little bit more on it than others, but Egypt comes up, in a multiple choice in a comparison. So I kind of highlighted just like the key terms again. Here, they're not even just bolded, they're highlighted. So what do you need to know about the government in Egypt? Well, they had the upper and lower kingdoms. Upper was actually south and lower was north. That's because of the flow of the river. It kind of goes this way. So just keep that in mind. And it's King Menes that actually unites it. Once they have that united government, then they're able to build monumental architecture. Cool. Glad you're enjoying this. Okay, so writing, you've got hieroglyphics. You've got, you've maybe seen samples of this. I actually went to Egypt this year. I was in Egypt back in, I think it was October, and it's awesome. You can go into an old tomb where there's like mummies, and you can see on the wall, it's just like covered with hieroglyphics. And so these are like pictorial. So, it's like reading a picture book. You just have to know what each one means. But because of that, they've got religion, they've got laws, they've got trade, economics. Egypt is very reliant on trade. They have access to luxuries because of this, like gold, like spices. And that's connecting them to other civilizations. In terms of religion, they're polytheistic. They believe in many gods, and they really focus on the afterlife. And because of that, they use mummification. So, have you ever seen like The Mummy? Like I love that movie. It's like that old Brendan Fraser movie. Have you seen The Mummy? Hit a 1 if you've seen The Mummy. So you've seen, you've got the mummies coming back to life in that, but in Egypt, in Cairo, they're in the museum, you can see some of the mummies. And like, this is one of the things I saw. I didn't take any pictures of it because it felt like, I don't know, there were like actual dead people laying there. But it's insane. Like, you can literally see hair on these people. You can see toenails still. I mean, it's like disgusting, but like they're thousands of years old. Like, they died thousands of years ago, but they've been preserved so well. It's like incredible to see. So you've got that mummification happening, and it's mostly the upper class, the pharaohs that are going to get mummified. And then finally, in terms of women's roles, women in Egypt actually had relatively high status compared to women in other places. They could buy and sell and inherit property, which was a huge change that doesn't happen in every civilization. So it's important that you see that in Egypt. And actually, the very first female ruler in all of history is Queen Hatshepsut. And that temple is another temple that I had visited. And she's like the very first female ruler in all of history. So, in terms of thinking about Egypt and gender roles, women have a relatively high status. And then there's social hierarchy. It kind of looks like that pyramid. They have very clear structures of, pharaoh, priests, nobles, merchants, peasants. And yeah, Dylan, all I want to do is brag about my trip. No, but honestly, it just helped me to understand some of these things. And so I like bringing those examples in with you. So social mobility was really difficult in Egypt. It was hard to start as a peasant and then like move up. You couldn't really do that. You kind of had to be born into that level. Is Egypt a theocracy? Kind of, yeah. It's because the priests, the pharaohs, they're really running the society based on their belief system, and that does kind of make them a theocracy. So, all right, moving forward, Indus River Valley. So after this one, we've got China and Mesoamerica. Okay, so we're moving forward. We're doing good. Stick with me. So the Aryans in the Indus River Valley. Okay, so I know a lot of you are in period 6 right now, and you know that the Nazis thought that the Aryans were the best. They talk about Aryan in a different term than I'm talking about it here. Aryans here specifically talk about the early like nomads that existed in the Indian subcontinent. Okay, so I'm not talking about Aryans here as like the blonde, blue-eyed, white people. This is like Aryans in the Indus River Valley. These are early Indian societies. So key thing to remember. So who are they? They're mostly nomads. They're in the Indus River Valley. They're in India, and they really established their religious beliefs there. What do they do? Well, they believed in a polytheistic society. They have many gods, and they wrote down their beliefs in their traditions in these two bolded terms, Vedas and the Upanishads. These eventually become the early like Hindu books, and so what they're doing is going to really have an effect on Indian history because they create this very segmented social structure, right? You've got warriors, priests, and peasants, and then they eventually add the Brahmins and who go above the warriors, and then merchants and landowners above the peasants. And so this system is going to become the caste system, which, as you've seen throughout history, has a giant effect on Indian history, right? The caste system. And then, of course, on the rise of Buddhism later, like, how do I get out of the caste system? Like, in Hinduism, you can't. You have to die and be reborn into a higher caste. In Buddhism, you got a better shot, right? There's no caste. So this kind of it helps explain some further pieces of Indian history. Vedic India comes after Indus River Valley, right? Yeah, so the Indus River Valley, the like original civilization, what they do kind of lays the foundation for further Indian societies to build on that. But you're going to see polytheism throughout, and you're going to see social structures throughout based on what the Aryans really set up, right? All right, early China. So there's two early Chinese dynasties to know, the Shang and the Zhou. You've got in the Shang dynasty, this is 600 to 1100, strong military, limited contact with the rest of the world, ethnocentric. So they're not, they're not like diverse. It's just the Chinese, like they're pretty isolated. And then they're industrious. They've got bronze, they've got wheels, pottery, silk, right? So these are kind of the things to know about Shang. The Zhou society, this one's a little bit more further developed. This is the longest ruling dynasty in all of Chinese history. They're the ones that really start the mandate of heaven, right? Because it's not going to be the first society that does it. It's the second, because they have to prove why they are in rule. Why should the Chinese society believe them when they say we should be in power? We're the new rulers of China, right? The mandate of heaven, they're going to use that to prove their point. And so as long as rulers are just, they have a blessing from the heavens. They belong in power. They're also going to develop a pretty complex feudal system that's kind of similar to Europe later on. So there's a little point of synthesis there that you potentially could use. And then also they have a really, they have a local bureaucracy, a really complex bureaucracy. So different, right? Think back to the different drawers, right? Different organizations that are going to focus on each thing, like education, like, whatever, the armies, like farming, whatever the different segments of society needs, they've got a really complicated system for that. So ethnocentric is a term, I don't have the full definition on me, but it basically means that like this culture was not diverse. Like the Shang society, it's not that you really only had Chinese, citizens within it. You don't have a diverse society. And part of that is important because they're not really well connected with the other societies. And so you don't have the like intermingling, right? You don't have diffusion in the Shang. Later on, you do. The feudal system is a system where you have, I think it's technically an economic system. And it's basically like, everyone is sort of tied to like someone who owns the land. and then below them are people who work on the land, and everything they do is kind of related back to that person. That's kind of a simplified way. It's very decentralized. So it's, instead of like there being like one strong ruler, you might see other like local leaders. And so what they do, the Zhao, they have very like specific people who are ruling different areas, like these local leaders, and that's how they're kind of keeping control of the whole region. And so once more, John, ethnocentric means that it's not diverse. It's specifically only China. Yeah, so the Shias, that's like the first one, and it's kind of this like mythical society. We don't have a lot of data on them. We don't know a lot about them, so they're not going to ask you about the Shia. They'll ask you about the Shang or the Zhao. Another thing that you can include on here that I forgot to include are oracle bones. That's kind of how they, it's not their written language, but it is a way that they like continued story through like objects. All right. Mesoamerica. There are two Mesoamerican societies that fall in this time period. There's the Olmec, which someone had mentioned before, and then the Chauvin. Oracle bone. I think oracle bones. I'm not sure exactly who started it. I think it was Shang, actually. And so oracle bones are just a way that you can talk about the Chinese like spreading like oral tradition through like physical things. Thanks, Jason. Shang. All right. So Mesoamerica. In terms of Olmecs, a couple things to know for each. Honestly, the biggest thing to know for either of these societies is that the two of them are like the major influencers of the future, like, Mayan and Aztec and Inca societies. Like, that's the biggest thing to know about these two. You're probably not going to get a specific question about them, but the Olmecs, you've got food sources like corn, beans, squash. You've got them mastering irrigation techniques. They are polytheistic. They've got a system of writing and a very, pretty complicated calendar, which is then going to, really influence like the Mayan calendar. The Chauvin, they've got the agricultural community, but they're going to supplement their food sources with seafood because they have access to that coast. They're going to use science and the science of metallurgy. Metallurgy is the process of using metals to make things. Tatiana, I don't know the answer to your question. Norte Chico? Sorry, I don't know. And then also the Chauvin are polytheistic faith. So did trade occur between the Olmec and the Chauvin? So probably, but not as much as it occurs in other societies. And part of that is just geography. So first of all, you can see that the difference in years is important here because they don't exist all at the same time. So they're, for the short amount of time that they do overlap, they will kind of interact with each other. But the actual like part of what you see in the Americas is north-south, right? So like you have one civilization here and then another one here and then another one here. And it's much harder to travel on a north-south axis because the climate is so different. In the Americas, in that Central American like peninsula, like that connection between North and South America, it's really hard to go across that. Like even now, it's really dense jungles, and it's just generally very difficult to actually like get through that. So you don't see a lot of connection between them because of that. Whereas in Afro-Eurasia, it's east-west, right? You've got, Europe or China and then Europe. And so it's a lot easier to travel east-west because the climate doesn't change, right? Like think of how the latitudes are different climates, but if you have to cross, going through the equator is very difficult, but going across the same latitude is much easier. So that's something to think about in terms of analysis of why some of the stuff that happens in Afro-Eurasia doesn't happen in the Americas. Was the Chauvin more organized than the Olmec? I'm not entirely sure. I think that the two of them had similar systems, but they weren't necessarily as developed as some of the other things that we're going to see. And part of that too is that they also have like the early human migrations take longer to get to the Americas, and so humans were just in the Americas for less time, and so you don't have the same like length of developments as you do in some of the other civilizations. Didn't have long distance trade because they didn't have animals. Exactly, that's another huge reason. Right, you don't have the animals to carry, so it's just like, what can I bring on my back? But in general, it's just like hard to go across like the equator. So here's like the Olmec head. This is like the one piece of art and architecture that you should know from Mesoamerica in this time period. Just attach this with Olmec. Other than that, that's pretty much it. Okay, so we just did a whole bunch on the early societies. So a couple of exam tips. There could definitely be a multiple choice question on the different writing systems or law codes. That would make for a really good multiple choice question, or something about monumental architecture where it has like an image or a couple of images and they ask you a couple of questions based on that. So just being able to kind of identify that all of them are doing it and knowing why, and then knowing some of the specifics like pyramid or ziggurat, those would give you evidence points. Same thing with the writing systems, right? Knowing cuneiform, hieroglyphics, quipu, those would give you evidence points on a larger analysis. There definitely could be a short answer question comparing societies. That would make for a really good question. Maybe it tells you about comparing women's roles. Maybe it asks you about comparing technologies or government systems. So, you're definitely not going to see a DBQ on this time period, but you're likely to see one set of multiple choice questions and then maybe one short answer question, and then one of the options for your LEQ could include this stuff. So that should help you with your studying. Like, think about the questions that you're going to get before you start to try to like memorize everything so that you can really focus on that. Just a couple like key takeaways. So like if we just look at all of period 1, technology is a really important key takeaway, key theme that's happening. You've got the settlement, in agriculture, which is leading to the need for, new basic tools and weaponry. And eventually that will lead to other goods that make life more comfortable. When you think about like ways in which life became easier for people, it's because of technologies that help that to happen. So first we develop technologies for agriculture and then to make our lives easier. A second piece is irrigation. The civilizations needed this in order to control flooding, to make water available, and then to, really just stabilize farming and stabilize crops. And that's all going to increase the population, right? More food equals more people, always. And then finally, the Bronze Age. Like, this is where we're really ushering in metallurgy at the beginning, and the beginning in permanent tools and weapons, and really allowing people to defend their territory. So, you really got these 3 pieces of like technology that can really help you look at this whole time period. And you could have even included that early use of fire as an example. Being able to do that is a form of technology. Another way that you can look at this whole time period is through the role of women. The College Board loves to ask questions like this, looking at the role of women within a society. You could look at the fact that egalitarian societies in the Paleolithic era weren't patriarchal. Like, women had a lot more power in those societies. It was biological differences that made like men hunters and women gatherers. But it's important to know that like gatherers were not seen as like a lower role. Like, it's not like, oh man, I only get to be a gatherer. No, like it didn't matter. Actually, like 70% of the food that people ate were coming from the gathered food. So women were vital to the society. Were men taller than women at the time? I'm not entirely sure, but biological differences do change us in terms of strength. And so that alone meant that like you want to send the strongest out to go hunt, and that might be the group of men. There might be 1 or 2 women that are strong and they're going to go too. But that's just kind of how things played out. But gathering was an insanely, vital role. And so it wasn't like it was seen as less. Women were always responsible for the socialization of children. Listen, don't write in your essay that women tended to the home. Like, I hate that like little phrase. I know what you mean, but like that seems really demoralizing, right? Talk more about what women did rather than what women didn't do. Like the fact that they were responsible for the socialization of children sounds a lot better than women tended to the home. You know, you kind of see the difference there. Also, there's evidence that women were instrumental in the development and spread of those early languages. I don't know exactly how, but a big part of writing things down and exchanging stories come from women. And then finally, you know, although men usually led societies, there were some tribes in Africa, and I kind of skipped Africa because the Bantu migrations come in the next time period, or actually even in period 3. So in Africa, we do see matriarchal societies where the women were in charge. And so this is kind of the key takeaway about women. So if you've got any questions about period 1,